Hello. It's interesting to follow yourself on video. I'm not meant to be here. Roni Mesa is meant to be here, but he is having flight trouble in Honduras, which is part of what I'm going to talk to you today about. I want to talk first about West Michigan. West Michigan is a thriving region of startups. I don't have to tell you that. It's been recognized as the most sustainable city. We have the most LEED certified buildings per capita. We're the second largest in philanthropic giving. We're home to the largest B Corp. And we've seen entrepreneurship as a mechanism for growth. I think we've also asked the question collectively as a community, how can we help others? And I'd really like to innovate around that concept of how can we really help others in other countries. So three of the models that I am going to talk about are nonprofit organizations, governmental organizations, as well as entrepreneurship as models of how to develop countries. Honduras is located in Central America. It's a rich Mayan cultural heritage. It's home to about 8 million people. 65% of those people live under the poverty line. So that means 6 out of 10 Hondurans live in relative poverty, and 2 out of 10 Hondurans live in extreme poverty. Most of these people live in the rural areas and the slums on the outskirts of the cities. The UNDP Violence Observatory reports that there are 16 homicides daily. Mostly narco-traffic activities and organized crime are usually responsible for these events. And more than 1.1 million people in Honduras lack access to safe water. This was something that was surprising to me. We come from a place where there is an abundance of fresh water, an abundance of safe drinking water, and when you start to spend time in developing countries and realizing how big of an issue water is, such a basic need, it's really interesting. There's actually about 3.575 million people that die every year from water-related disease. So a child dies of water-related disease every 15 seconds. And not only that in terms of the deaths, but there's about 50% of the world's hospital beds at any given time are inhabited by people suffering from water-related illnesses. So it's not just the death, it's the inefficiency, the inability to get to work, the bottlenecks in the healthcare system to do that. And we were actually in the Dominican Republic, and we visited a prescription area of a hospital, and half of it was anti-parasite and rehydration fluid. So you think about that community. They come in, they take the anti-parasite, they take the rehydration, they go home, they drink the same water that got them sick, they go back, they get the anti-parasite, the rehydration fluid, and they go back. And so it's one of these problems that if you're starting with the premise of how do I help people, you need to think about, well, what are the problems? And really listen. We always have our own agendas of what we want to do, what we'd like to provide, but I think that listening to what the issues really are and what people are saying are the problems are really important, because about 95% of the cases of waterborne illness are entirely preventable. So I wanted to show a short video clip to kind of give an image of what we're discussing. So the first area I wanted to talk about was nonprofit organizations. So if you look at water as an issue, let's look at how that can be addressed through nonprofit organizations. I think in many cases there is a positive impact from nonprofit organizations, but there's a few limitations that cause them to not have the sustainable impact, I think, that they could in general. One of those is limited fundraising capacity. Nonprofits are on an economic fundraising wheel. You raise enough funds for this year, you got to raise for next year, you got to raise for the next year, you got to raise for the next year, and it's never ending. You're raising all the money and giving all the money away every year. So in an economic downturn, we saw that many nonprofits went out of business, and that has implications to those areas that they're serving. So that creates a bit of a structural problem. The second one is that typically there's a project-based approach. So you go down, typically when you're working with water, someone might build a well, and so they'll say, okay, we have this well, we have this budget, we have this implementation plan. They implement the well, but they often aren't there for the follow-up. They aren't there for the ongoing support. And a recent study showed that 70% of the hand pumps that were implemented in West Africa were not functioning after 2 years. So they need big equipment, they need repairs, they need other things. And where's that group? They're not there to help them with the next phase of their development. Also, some donors have individual requests that may move the nonprofit from their core area, and so they may not be able to have an ongoing presence with the different project. So I created an ideal. The ideal is that the top helps the bottom, and the bottom can help themselves. This is how we're going to move forward. And the current reality of where we are with nonprofits is that the top is helping the bottom, but they're actually pushing the bottom down. They're disempowering the bottom so that they're not able to help themselves. This isn't the case across the board. There are definitely nonprofit organizations that are doing positive work and that is making an impact, but one of the other problems is disjointed efforts. So with so many nonprofits working in the area of water, it's a great example of this. There's a Millennium Development Goal to have, by 2015, the amount of people without sustainable access to drinking water. And in that time period, the number of people dying from waterborne illnesses has actually gone up from 2.2 million to 3.575 million people dying per year. So we don't really have a cohesive approach. There's numerous nonprofits working in many different areas, sometimes in disjointed efforts. I actually went to a place in Comiagua, in Honduras, and spoke with a gentleman, and he said that they were bien visitado, which meant well visited. They had people coming in, group after group after group, and another group that we had talked with had actually started building a wall so that when a mission group came down, they could work on the wall. And they didn't know what they were going to do with the wall, but they said that was a way for them to keep them out of their hair for the week that they were down there. So it's interesting how, when you look at it from our perspective, you go down, you have this experience, you come back, but there are people going from Japan, there are people going from Africa, there are people going from Europe, there are people going from Michigan, Detroit, Texas, everywhere, combining on areas that are impoverished. And so the efforts are a bit disjointed when you're looking at it from the bottom. And they also sometimes create competition against the for-profits. So an example of that would be mosquito nets. There was a mosquito netting company that actually produced mosquito nets in Africa. And when they had donations coming in of mosquito nets, they went out of business. So this is the current reality that we're facing in nonprofits. International development through government is often subject to corruption or disruption as power changes. Many of you know that in 2009 in Honduras there was a change in power, and that led to the economic growth stalling, foreign investment fled, and there was a bit of an instability at that time. So there's disruption as power changes, but also corruption. In the past 50 years, over $1 trillion of development aid was transferred from rich countries in Africa, to Africa. And yet in 2003, 36.2% of the population was still living under $1 a day. And evidence of that corruption comes from such people as President Zaire's Mobutu. And he stole up to $5 billion, an amount equivalent to the entire external debt of the country. And in an example highlighted in the book, Dead Aid, Why Aid is Not Working and How There's a Better Way for Africa by Dambisa Moyo, Mobutu had requested a reduction in interest payments on the debt and then turned around and leased the Concorde to fly his daughter to her wedding in the Ivory Coast. So this corruption and disruption in government also makes it difficult to empower the bottom. So international development through entrepreneurship could be a sustained economic development opportunity. One thing that we've seen from the other two models is that they haven't focused on as much on the bottom helping themselves. You need to be able to understand and empower the local culture to make it work. You need to understand what their pain points are. You need to build trust. And you need to allow the locals to bring it to market in the way that makes the most sense in their culture. So these are just some examples of people bringing things to market in ways that are appropriate. And what you'll see, there was actually a lady who received the BioSand water filter, and she made popsicles that she went out and sold in the local community. And you can see that the entrepreneurship spirit is there, that there's a desire to work your way out of poverty, but the opportunities are key. There needs to be opportunities. So what does this all mean? Entrepreneurship is about empowering. Successful entrepreneurs address their customers' pain points. Many of us know that. You're not going to be a successful entrepreneur unless you know who your customer is, how you can address their pain point, and how you can create value for them. So while NGOs and governments can address what they think or perceive the model to be, they can give something and say, I think this will help you, and they can say thank you. There's not the same drive for the long term to address a pain point. An example is the BioSand water filter as a product that works for entrepreneurs in developing countries because it's designed for the people who it's serving. Unlike a UV filter or reverse osmosis, some of these other complex systems that take a lot of electricity, they take a lot of energy, and they can't handle turbid water sources, which are what they have in the rural areas, and they're very expensive. They're not designed, and they don't last in the local culture. On the other end, you have these types of filtration that are immediate, a life straw or a pure water sachet or something that can get water immediately, but then becomes waste relatively quickly because it's past its useful life. So these types of products that can last for a long time, this actually has an 80% acceptance rate after 8 years. Because it fits into the local culture, you can put water directly from a bucket, which is how traditionally it's being used in the rural areas. You put the water directly from the bucket and you can get the water out. That's something that's designed for the pain points of the people in the local culture. So like the people in West Michigan, the Honduran people have an incredible capacity to innovate. But they need education and they need opportunities. This route of entrepreneurship sometimes takes more investment, but it has a long-term sustainable approach. Entrepreneurship is successful when you've met the needs of your customer. So let's make people in developing countries the customer rather than the recipient of nonprofit handouts or government aid. Because sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective and sustainable. Thank you.